No punishment for honest mistakes is how the Prime Minister reassured Canadians today, saying no one will be penalized for genuine errors tied to the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, as the Liberal government prepares a draft bill on fraudulent CERB claims, and it's making the rounds. Fines and jail time will be part of the bill, though. So how will the government make sure honest people are not penalized? And what will the government do if provinces reject the conditions on the $14 billion reopening aid package that has strings attached? The Treasury Board President Jean-Yves Duclos joins us. Always good to have you, Minister, on the program, and I hope you're well. I know this is still a draft bill, and it hasn't been presented with the House. CTV has seen this draft bill. The Prime Minister said today that honest mistakes won't be punished. How will you be able to tell the difference between honest mistakes and genuine fraudsters when the NDP is concerned that the definition of a reasonable return to work is too hazy and too difficult to define?
Well, good evening, Evan, and very pleased to talk to you, and good evening, everyone listening. Well, as most listeners will know, the CERB, the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, was put in an emergency context because we knew the urgency of helping Canadians. We also said from the very start that we knew that the vast majority of Canadians are honest and that we could depend on their honesty to make that system work. And that is going to continue. However, there are very few cases, but some cases of reported fraud that have come to the attention of the Canada Revenue Agency and of Service Canada that require the type of integrity and rigor that the Prime Minister mentioned just this morning.
But, sir, can you define what a reasonable return to work is? That's part of the bill. That will be critical. If someone does not go to work and they keep applying to whatever the CERB is, then they could be subjected to the fine. Can you please define what a reasonable return to work is?
No, maybe I should correct what you've just said, Evan. A fraud is not a reasonable reason not to return to work. A fraud is not an error that someone made in good faith. A fraud is a deliberate attempt to provide false information in good knowledge. So it's something that is deliberately false and provided to the government for the benefit of that person or someone else. So we're talking about very different things. So we know that.
Sir, but can I let me just push back, sir, because I think the concern is for many of the 8.4 million Canadians who have applied, some of them have jobs that do not pay $15 an hour. Okay, so some of them were making less than the CERB. Now I understand the feature of the CERB was to keep people at home. I appreciate that. But what if some people who say, you know what, I'm not comfortable, I don't want to go to work, I'm concerned about my health, I'm concerned about the safety in the workplace, but, you know, the job is open for me, but I'm going to keep claiming the CERB. Could the government come back at them and say, you should have taken that job, now you're subjected to fines? That's what the bill, as we've seen it, seems to suggest.
No, the key word is reasonable. If someone has a reason to believe that his or her workplace is not safe, that person should not return to her or his workplace. That person should talk to the employer, with eventually the assistance of a public health official, because the safety and the health of employees is of absolute priority. What is at stake is completely different. We know there are very few, but still quite a few Canadians who would have been tempted to fraud the system. Fraud is a very strong word. It implies acting in bad faith, providing bad information knowingly. That's very different from someone who reasonably cannot return to work for the reason that you mentioned.
Right, it's going to be difficult. If you're going after individual so-called fraudsters on the CERB, is your government going to go after companies who may be defrauding on the wage subsidy?
The answer is absolutely yes. There is a very severe penalty already into legislation for companies that, and we certainly don't encourage those companies to do that, but if they did fraud the system by using those precious public dollars for other things and paying wage subsidies, they would be sued with important consequences.
Mr. Duclos, the Canadian Revenue Agency has set up essentially a snitch line. It's called the National Leads Program, which essentially are asking Canadians to snitch on each other for fraud. How does your government, that keeps saying we trust Canadians, there's only a few people, Doesn't your snitch line sow mistrust to have neighbors snitching on neighbors?
Well, the line is there for, again, the very few cases of people that would be frauding the system. And again, vast majority of Canadians wouldn't want to do this and wouldn't even think about doing that. So we know that these sorts of lines and mechanisms are of relatively modest use, but they can be used in circumstances, unfortunately, they do exist, in circumstances where there would be fraudsters.
Yeah, well, the people are worried about sowing the seeds of mistrust. Just before I let you go, I got to ask you about the $14 billion for the provinces for the reopening that the Prime Minister promised last Friday for the reopening aid packages. There are strings attached. It's got to be used on the 10-day sick leave for PPE. But you have premiers like the Ontario Premier who said it's not nearly enough. He's looking for like $24 or $25 billion for his own province. And others don't want strings attached. One, is there more money available, and will your government give that money and the provinces can use it how they want? No strings attached?
Well, three things very briefly. First, we understand the severe pressure that provinces undergo. Second, we know that the demand could be infinite. That's understandable. But third, we believe that $14 billion is still quite a lot of money. And especially since it has been designed and proposed in a very collaborative manner. Premiers, first ministers have been talking with each other for the last 12 weeks, every week, so they understand each other's needs. So we believe that the $14 billion offer is going to be of great help to provinces and territories, and we now need to continue our collaboration to see how those dollars will be useful for Canadians.
Right. Okay, and I got 10 seconds here, but your government clearly is going to extend the CERB program after the July deadline. Is that right? Just so a lot of anxiety about that. In some form or another, CERB is going to be extended. Is that fair to say?
Well, there will be a future for social policy. We stated from the very start that the CERB was an emergency benefit, that there would be something afterwards, something which would be better aligned with the evolving economic situation that businesses and Canadians are finding themselves in. So we need to evolve because the situation is also evolving, and that's exactly what we will be doing in the next few days and weeks.
Michel Duclos, always good to have you on the program. I appreciate your thoughts on this. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Evan.